Hook. They say marriage is a partnership, but what happens when only one person shows up for the job, day after day, year after year? The funeral was over, but the house still smelled like a strange cocktail of bleach, stale lilies, and smoke from extinguished candles. It clung to the air like grief itself, sinking into the hardwood floors and the faded floral curtains. I stood by the dining room window, watching distant headlights flicker through the fog, and for a brief second I thought, maybe now it's over. Maybe the 10-year stretch of caretaking, of losing myself piece by piece to someone else's needs, was finally done. I had spent the last decade of my life taking care of Graham's bedridden mother. Every morning at 5 a.m. I pureed her food. Every evening I changed her pads, massaged her legs, and coaxed her into sleep. Nights were never restful. I'd wake 3 or 4 times to reposition her, prevent bed sores, or administer meds. While my peers were planning vacations or taking up hobbies, I was making sure the diaper bin didn't overflow and the wheelchair ramp didn't ice over. Graham, my husband of 28 years, rarely lifted a finger. He always had a work trip or too much going on. And when he was home, the house felt darker, heavier. He'd sit in silence or snap at me for things I didn't do. Dust on the windowsill, the soup being too thin. His presence was like a door constantly threatening to slam shut. But I stayed. I stayed because somewhere deep inside, I believed that my effort meant something. That Graham, even if he didn't say it, felt gratitude. I imagined a time when, with his mother gone, he and I could finally live again. Slow mornings with coffee, evening walks, a quiet hand resting in mine on the porch swing. I believed that if I gave my all, something good would grow from it. But I was wrong. That evening, we sat at the dinner table, the 3 of us, me, Graham, and our daughter Amelia, who had flown in from Seattle. None of us had much appetite. The room was silent except for the sound of Amelia nervously pushing a broccoli floret around her plate. And then Graham set down his fork. He didn't look at me when he said it. He stared straight ahead, like talking to the air. "Claire, I think we should get a divorce. This just isn't working. And it hasn't been for a long time." Just like that, no hesitation, no build-up, 10 years of sacrifice, 10 years of lost sleep, lost peace, lost identity. All dismissed with a sentence. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I didn't even feel shocked. I just sat there and stared at him like I was watching the final credits roll on a film I hadn't even realized was ending. My body was frozen, but inside, something started to break. No, not break. Peel away. As if the version of myself that stayed silent, that kept showing up without complaint, was finally done. He expected me to argue, to beg, to fall apart. But I simply said, "Okay." The word fell from my mouth like a stone into deep water. I saw the flicker of confusion cross his face. He hadn't prepared for that. He thought I'd fight him, that maybe I still needed him, but I didn't. What I needed had been gone for years. I stood up quietly, walked into the bedroom, and pulled out the old leather-bound ledger I kept in the bottom drawer. It held every expense from the last decade, every medical bill, every grocery list, every receipt for the supplies I bought when he was too busy to notice. I knew, even in that moment, that I wasn't just saying yes to a divorce. I was saying yes to me, to the version of Claire I had buried beneath caregiving, beneath silence, beneath shame. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a museum of servitude, one I was finally ready to leave behind. And in the silence that followed my okay, something shifted. Not in him, but in me. I was done begging for crumbs in a house I helped build. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a breakthrough. I didn't sleep that night. The house was silent, oppressively so. No rustling from the bedroom, no oxygen machine humming in the next room, no shuffling from Graham's mother as she groaned in her sleep. Just me, lying on my side of the bed, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling fan, unmoving in the dark. I wasn't grieving the end of the marriage. I was grieving the woman I'd been. For 10 years, I lived like a ghost in my own life. The world outside kept turning. Amelia grew up, friends retired, seasons changed, but I stayed stuck in the same loop, Diapers, meds, pureed food. Repeat. I'd lost count of the birthdays I'd spent wiping someone else's mouth instead of blowing out candles of my own. I'd given up weekend trips, stopped watching movies halfway through, and hadn't finished a novel in over 5 years. People used to call me selfless, but selfless too often just meant invisible. The next morning, Graham came into the kitchen, tie askew, coffee mug in hand. His expression was unreadable, neutral, like we were co-workers instead of two people who had shared a bed, a life, a history. "So," he said, his tone too casual, "if you're serious about the divorce, maybe we should talk logistics." Logistics? As if our marriage had been a company merger gone bad. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, scrolling through something on his phone. "The house," he said. "Technically it was in my family before the wedding. Even though we renovated it together, I think we both know whose name should stay on the deed." I didn't flinch. "Claire," he continued, "I'll be fair. I'll take 2/3 of the equity and let you keep the car, and I can probably give you around $40,000 as a parting cushion." Like it was a severance package. I stared at him, then slowly got up, walked into the guest room, opened the drawer under the bed and pulled out the folder I'd kept hidden for years. When I returned, I dropped it on the table in front of him. "What's this?" he asked, frowning. "Receipts, records, invoices, and a copy of the house deed, with both our names on it." He opened the folder, flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowing with every line. Medical bills, home care costs, modifications for the house, ramps, handrails, hospital bed rentals, most paid out of our joint account, some from my own savings. "You really kept track of all this?" he muttered. "I had to. Someone needed to." His face darkened. He thought I'd just roll over, that I'd be too tired, too meek, too heartbroken to push back. "I'm not leaving this house with nothing," I said, my voice even, "and if you try to force me out, I'll see you in court." For a moment, he just sat there, stunned. Then he laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You're not the woman I married." "No," I replied. "That woman doesn't exist anymore. You killed her with neglect." That afternoon, Amelia came over, having sensed something from my voice over the phone. When I told her everything, his proposal, his offer, his smug little smirk, her hands curled into fists on the table. "Dad said that?" she asked, jaw clenched. I nodded. "I watched you take care of Grandma every single day. You gave up everything," she said, her voice rising. "And now he wants to throw you out like you're some appliance that stopped working?" Her fury shook me in the best way. I'd spent so long hiding my pain to protect Amelia, I didn't want her to carry the burden of seeing her father as someone less than heroic. But now, she saw clearly, and she stood beside me. That night, I called a divorce attorney. By the end of the week, I'd opened my own checking account, filed a petition to split assets 50-50, and requested an official evaluation of the house. Graham stopped talking to me. No words, no questions, no apologies. He just sat in the living room every night, chain-smoking and staring at the muted TV, as if pretending none of it was happening. But it was happening. The tides had turned, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't drowning. I was swimming. Not effortlessly, not gracefully, but with every stroke, I was pushing farther from the shore that once held me hostage. Sometimes strength doesn't come from fury. It comes from clarity, and I'd never seen more clearly in my life. The days that followed were strangely quiet. There were no more whispered arguments behind closed doors, no icy silence at the dinner table, just Graham retreating into himself, chain-smoking on the back porch, scrolling endlessly on his phone, the glow of the screen casting shadows across his face. He didn't ask about the divorce proceedings. He didn't try to argue. He didn't even ask what Amelia thought. Maybe he assumed I'd back down. Maybe he thought this was another bluff I'd eventually abandon, like the hobbies I once loved or the dreams I'd shelved for the sake of keeping the peace. But this time, I didn't back down. I scheduled the property appraisal. I met with my attorney every Friday. I gathered the paperwork, bank statements, investment records, old tax returns, and slowly, piece by piece, I started untangling the life we had so tightly wound around each other. It was exhausting, but it was also liberating. One afternoon, Graham's sister, Denise, showed up at my doorstep with a Tupperware of tuna casserole and a forced smile. "I just thought," she said hesitantly, "maybe you and Graham could take a step back. Reconsider. Divorce is such a drastic move, Claire, especially right after his mother passed." I stared at her for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or scream. "Denise," I said calmly, "how many times did you visit your mother in the last 10 years? She blinked. I tried once for 2 hours. That's how many times you came." Her mouth opened, but no words came. "You all want to talk about family values now, but when I was spoon-feeding your mother, changing her diapers, rubbing lotion onto her paper-thin skin to prevent sores, none of you showed up. You didn't even send flowers. And now that Graham doesn't want to be married anymore, suddenly I'm the problem for not being more graceful?" Her expression crumbled. "I just thought maybe you'd be the bigger person." I tilted my head, gave a small, tired smile. "I am being the bigger person. I'm walking away without burning down the whole damn house." That night, I slept better than I had in years. By the time the official appraisal came back, the house was valued at $610,000. We had just over $140,000 in mutual funds and an old life insurance policy I'd forgotten I was still the primary beneficiary on. Graham couldn't buy me out. His credit was a mess, and his personal savings were nearly gone. So he agreed, reluctantly, to list the house and split the profit. We met in a modest legal office in downtown Phoenix to sign the papers. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us. The air conditioning blew cold enough to sting. I wore a navy blouse and slacks, hair pulled neatly into a bun, no makeup except for a soft coral lipstick I'd rediscovered in the back of a drawer. Graham looked smaller, like someone who had been deflated from the inside out. His shirt was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the pen. For a second, our eyes met. I didn't see anger. I saw regret, maybe even fear. But I didn't care anymore. That part of me, the part that waited for his warmth, his remorse, his love, it had been cut away like a dead branch. And I wasn't going to graft it back on just because he looked sad in a courthouse conference room. I checked every line of the agreement before signing, numbers, dates, clause by clause. I had lived too long ignoring fine print, of legal documents, of marriage vows, of silent expectations. I wasn't making that mistake again. As I pressed my pen to the page, I felt a strange sensation. Not grief, not relief, just release. Like the sound of a lock turning from the inside, finally setting me free. Outside, the sun was high and scorching. Arizona heat wrapped around me like a dry towel, but I didn't mind. I walked down the steps of the courthouse and onto the sidewalk without turning back. Behind me, Graham lingered, maybe watching. I didn't look. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing he still occupied even a sliver of my mind. That chapter was closed, sealed, filed away. With my share of the house sale and half the liquid assets, I found a small apartment on the north side of Scottsdale, close to Amelia's office. It was a one-bedroom with outdated tile and chipped countertops, but the balcony caught the morning sun and the neighbors were quiet. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in years, every fork in the drawer was where I put it. Every shelf held only what I wanted. Every square foot of that space answered to no one but me. I didn't hang wedding photos. I didn't even bring the living room couch. I bought myself a soft recliner, a simple desk, and a new lamp. Just one, because I'd spent too many nights in dark rooms waiting for someone else to care that I couldn't see. And when Amelia came over that first weekend to help me unpack, she brought wine and Chinese takeout and 3 of her friends. They laughed loudly, they played music, they teased me about how a woman with 30-year-old pots shouldn't be this cool. And I laughed with them, not politely, not out of habit, But from somewhere deep and genuine and unburdened, this wasn't just my new beginning, it was my return to myself. My new apartment wasn't perfect. The tile in the kitchen was chipped. The air conditioning made a low hum like a tired dog snoring. The bathroom mirror had a small crack in the corner, and the oven's timer didn't always ding. But it was mine. I didn't have to ask permission to paint the walls a soft almond cream. I didn't have to tiptoe around someone's mood before deciding what was for dinner. I didn't have to wait for the TV to be free or eat cold leftovers because someone else forgot to save me a plate. For the first time in decades, I could sit on my small balcony with a cup of tea and just exist. No diapers to change, no medications to organize, no snide remarks from the other side of the couch. Amelia visited often. Sometimes she'd bring over her laptop and work from my kitchen table, sipping coffee while I organized spice jars or folded laundry. Other times, she'd drag me to flea markets, saying things like, "Mom, you need more color in your life. And I don't mean beige." She was right. I'd been surviving for so long that I'd forgotten how to live. At her suggestion, I enrolled in a watercolor painting class at the local community center. The first time I walked in, clutching a beginner's paint set and a blank pad, I felt ridiculous, like a kid pretending to be someone creative. My hand trembled as I held the brush. My first apple looked like a bruised tomato. But no one laughed. The other women, mostly in their 50s, 60s, and beyond, welcomed me warmly. We talked about brush pressure, shading, and the kinds of things no one had asked me about in years. It was like my brain exhaled. Twice a week I painted. Not because it served a purpose, not because it fed someone or saved money, just because it made me feel good. And feeling good was still something I was learning to allow. I also joined a morning stretching and movement class at the park. The group met at 6:30 a.m. sharp, led by a woman named Sheila, loud, fabulous, and always wearing neon leggings that looked like they came from a 1980s music video. The first week, I moved like a rusted hinge, barely able to touch my knees, let alone my toes. But no one cared. "Doesn't matter if you're on beat," Sheila shouted through the music. "Just move! Sweat out the years!" And I did. With every twist, every laugh, every offbeat kick, I felt pieces of myself coming back. The woman I'd buried under duty and caregiving and Graham's constant disapproval, she was still in there. Tired, maybe. A little worn at the edges, but alive. One Saturday morning, after class, Sheila pulled me aside and said, "Claire, I don't know what you've been through, but honey, you're glowing. You walk like a woman who just got her freedom papers." I laughed, but deep down, it hit me. I was glowing. Not from highlighter or serums, but from within. Freedom doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it's just the quiet confidence of knowing you owe no one your silence anymore. Meanwhile, Graham's life was unraveling in slow motion. He moved into a small rental apartment a few blocks away from where we used to live. It was in a complex he used to mock for its peeling paint and bad parking. But now, it was all he could afford. He tried to make the most of his second act, joined a few dating sites, met some women for coffee, tried to reinvent himself as a misunderstood man who'd been taken for granted, but reality didn't match the fantasy. Turns out, women can spot a sob story wrapped in arrogance from a mile away. He talked too much about himself, complained about the price of lattes, grumbled when dates didn't split the bill. One even posted about him anonymously in a local forum. If he tells you he just got out of a long marriage and finally sees his worth, run. Word got around. He stopped dating, stopped trying, and started calling Amelia more often. "Just checking in," he'd say, voice thin. "Have you talked to your mom?" She never answered that part. She told me once, "I don't hate him, but I don't respect him either, and I think that hurts him more." I nodded. She was right. Graham hadn't just lost a wife. He'd lost his daughter's admiration. That's not something you get back with an apology or a grocery store bouquet. He was discovering, painfully, that the love you take for granted doesn't wait around forever. I, on the other hand, was still blooming. I started wearing dresses again, not to please anyone, just because they made me feel pretty. I bought a wide-brimmed straw hat, the kind I used to say I had no reason to wear. Now I wore it to the Saturday farmers market, where I'd buy fresh peaches and sunflowers and chat with the vendors like I'd lived there for years. I didn't need much. But everything I had, space, calm, sunlight, friends, I chose intentionally. No one handed me this life. I built it, brush stroke by brush stroke, step by step. And I wasn't giving it up for anyone. By fall, the desert air in Scottsdale had shifted. Mornings grew crisp and the evenings carried a whisper of cold. For me, it meant hot tea on the balcony and watercolor landscapes in warm tones. For Graham, it marked the start of his undoing. He'd spent the summer pretending he was finally free. He posted filtered fishing photos with captions like, "living again," and "doing me now." But the fantasy wore thin fast. His back, never strong to begin with, began to betray him again. The herniated disc he used to complain about resurfaced with a vengeance. Without anyone to help him stretch, apply heat packs, or call the doctor, even tying his shoes became a gamble. One night, trying to bend over and pick up a dropped fork, he collapsed. No one came to help. He lay there, curled on the carpet, sweating through his shirt, alone in the dim light of his living room. No mother in the next room, no wife nearby, just silence and the ticking sound of the microwave clock. He managed to crawl to his phone and dial 911. The paramedics came, lifted him onto a stretcher, and wheeled him out past the neighbors he barely knew. He spent the night in a crowded ER under fluorescent lights, listening to nearby patients being visited by daughters, sons, spouses. People brought blankets, asked questions, held hands. Graham? No one came. He texted Amelia sometime around 2 a.m. "In ER, just thought you should know." She replied hours later, "Thanks for the update. Hope you recover soon." He didn't text again. After being released, he returned to his cluttered apartment, now truly aware of what independence felt like. Not like freedom, but abandonment. The fridge was empty except for a bottle of ketchup, expired milk, and a box of baking soda. He ate cereal with water for 3 days before mustering the energy to go grocery shopping. That's when the messages started. First, a few casual texts to me. "Hey Claire, just wanted to see how you're doing. Hope you're keeping busy with your painting." I ignored them. Then came the longer ones, dripping in nostalgia and guilt. "I've been thinking about our old kitchen lately. You always made it feel warm. I know I messed up. I didn't value you the way I should have." I didn't reply. So he called the library where I worked. I picked up the phone one day, instinctively, not recognizing the number. "Claire," he said, his voice strained, almost shaking. "Please, just hear me out." My response was calm, cold, but not cruel. "Graham, we're divorced. Legally, emotionally, entirely. Your health, your debt, your loneliness, none of it is mine to carry anymore. Please don't call again." 3 seconds of silence. Then the line went dead. A few days later, he showed up at Amelia's apartment, looking gaunt and exhausted, his back slightly hunched. He didn't knock, just waited by her car until she came home from work. She found him standing there like a ghost from a story she no longer read. "Dad," she said cautiously, "you can't just show up here." "I didn't know where else to go," he said, voice cracking. "I need help, Amelia. I can't do this alone." She didn't cry, didn't yell. She took a breath, then said evenly, "I'll help arrange a caregiver. Maybe even look into an assisted living facility, but don't expect Mom to step in. That door is closed." He blinked, stunned. "I'm your father." "And she's my mother," Amelia said. "She gave everything and you threw it away. She's finally breathing again. Let her." She turned and walked inside. Graham didn't follow. Still clinging to scraps of hope, he turned next to his sister, Denise. He wept in her living room, said I'd turned cold, claimed I'd left him to rot, painted himself as a man undone by a heartless ex-wife who couldn't even forgive. Denise showed up at my door again, this time not with casserole, but with shaky hands and a tentative voice. "He's in bad shape," she said. "Really bad. I know he made mistakes, but could you be the bigger person?" I was at my small writing desk sorting art supplies. I looked up and said clearly, "I was the bigger person. For 28 years, I carried more than my share. But being bigger doesn't mean being used." Denise looked stunned, like she hadn't expected me to hold the line. "He's your daughter's father," she murmured. "He still is, and she's helping him. I don't owe him more than that." There was no shouting, no slammed doors, just the quiet, unmovable wall of a woman who had spent a lifetime saying yes, now saying no. No to guilt, no to shame, no to playing the nurse while someone else naps through life. After that, the messages stopped. For a while, the silence was golden. Graham stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped popping up like an unwanted memory. I knew better than to believe he had let go, but I enjoyed the stillness anyway. Then, as expected, he made one last desperate move. He took our old wedding photo, the one taken in the backyard of our first home where I was still young, still smiling, still naive, and posted it across local forums, church bulletins, even a Facebook group for neighbors helping neighbors. His message was calculated, 30 years of marriage, gone. I wasn't perfect, but who is? Now I'm sick, alone, and abandoned. I'm not asking for money, just prayers, maybe a visit. He played the victim like it was second nature. And for a moment, it worked. Sympathetic comments poured in. "No one deserves that." "She should check on him." "Claire must be so cold-hearted." Some even reached out to me directly, urging me to forgive, to be Christian, to just see how he's doing. But I didn't stay quiet. I posted just once. Calm, factual, with no venom, only truth. "Thank you for your concern. Graham and I are divorced. All assets were legally divided. I cared for his bedridden mother for 10 years, alone. He filed for divorce 5 days after her funeral, telling me I was no longer needed. I don't wish him harm, but I won't go back. My silence was never cruelty. It was survival." The effect was immediate. Comments flipped. People remembered. Some even shared screenshots of Graham's bragging about poker wins, failed investments, and how liberated he felt after the divorce. His pity parade fell apart. Within days, he deleted every post, withdrew from the groups, and slipped out of public view entirely. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. This wasn't revenge. It was closure. What Graham never understood was that real strength isn't loud. It's final. It's a woman who doesn't raise her voice because she doesn't have to. A woman who doesn't threaten because her boundaries speak louder than any words. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. The life I'd built, book by book, brushstroke by brushstroke, morning stretch by morning stretch, wasn't just a recovery. It was a resurrection, and I wasn't letting anyone drag me back to the grave I had once crawled out of. In the months that followed Graham's public meltdown, his world continued to shrink. The back pain worsened, so much so that even getting out of bed became a struggle. The doctor told him point blank, without surgery and several weeks of physical therapy, he could risk partial paralysis. But Graham had no health insurance, no savings left, and no real friends still answering his calls. He tried once more, this time through Amelia. He didn't ask for much, at least not at first, just said he needed help getting through the application process for government-subsidized care, that he didn't have anyone else. Amelia helped, not because he was her father, but because she was her mother's daughter. She filled out the forms, made the calls, even took a day off work to tour a state-funded nursing facility just outside Mesa. It wasn't luxurious, dim corridors, small shared rooms, and a faint smell of bleach and overcooked rice, but it was clean, professional, and affordable. The day she moved him in, Graham didn't complain. He barely spoke. He just shuffled along with his walker, eyes low, like someone finally understanding the consequences of every choice he thought would never matter. When Amelia came home that evening, she sat at my kitchen table in silence. Her tea went cold in her hands. After a while, she whispered, "He looked 10 years older," like the light went out. I didn't answer right away. I just reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Some things don't need words. From that point on, Graham stayed quiet. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't try again. Maybe he knew, really knew, that we were done saving him from the life he created. Amelia visited him occasionally. She said he was polite to the staff, didn't cause trouble, took his meds when asked. But she also said he rarely spoke. He stared out the window a lot, didn't ask about me, except once. One Sunday, Amelia stopped by after her visit and said, "He asked if you ever mention him." I raised an eyebrow, but she continued, "I told him the truth." I said, "No. You're not angry, you've just moved on." And I had, not in spite, not in triumph, but in peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by someone else's needs. I didn't revolve around a marriage, or caregiving, or keeping a fragile man from falling apart. I revolved around myself, around the books I recommended at the library, the women in my watercolor class, the sound of music in the park during morning Zumba. I wore clothes that made me feel elegant. I bought good skincare. I made Sunday pancakes just for me. I laughed without checking the room for someone else's reaction. And when I stood in the mirror each morning, I didn't see a woman recovering. I saw a woman reborn. I used to think that being the bigger person meant staying, sacrificing, forgiving. But now I know. It means walking away without burning everything down. It means reclaiming your peace and never letting anyone take it again. Life didn't become perfect after Graham, but it became mine. The days had rhythm now. I'd wake early, make a pot of tea, and open the windows to let the desert sun warm the hardwood floor. Some mornings I'd stretch on the balcony, other days I'd paint. Soft landscapes, blooming florals, a quiet bowl of fruit. Sometimes they turned out beautiful, sometimes they didn't, but I always finished them, and that alone felt like healing. The library job continued to bring me joy. I knew the regulars by name, Mr. Albert who read war memoirs, young Emily who loved anything with dragons, and Gloria who brought me banana bread every second Thursday. People started calling me Miss Claire, and the name felt like a new chapter, not just a title. I hung my second community art award in the hallway next to a photo of Amelia and me in matching sun hats at the summer fair. We looked like women who had never carried weight heavier than a purse, but I knew the truth. We'd carried so much, and finally learned to set it down. One Saturday evening, Amelia and I sat on my balcony as the sun dipped below the stucco rooftops. We were sipping lavender tea when I asked quietly, "When you were little, did you ever think I was weak?" Amelia turned to me, startled. "No," she said. "I used to think you were quiet. Too quiet. Like maybe you didn't know how to take up space." She looked down at her cup, then back at me. "But now I realize you were the one holding everything together. You weren't behind me, Mom. You were ahead of me. You always were." I smiled, not a practiced smile, not the kind I used to wear to survive a long dinner or dodge an argument, a real one. That night, I wrote something and taped it to my fridge. At 65, I didn't retire. I didn't fade. I began. I stopped asking for space and took it. I stopped apologizing for peace and protected it. I stopped waiting for love to arrive and gave it to myself. I've learned that age doesn't close doors. It opens them, if you're brave enough to turn the knob. I've also learned that walking away doesn't make you bitter. It makes you whole. Graham thought leaving me would make him free, but it wasn't me who kept him confined. It was his refusal to grow. His bitterness became his cage, his regret, the key he never turned. As for me, I kept going. I signed up for a new class, beginner's Spanish, not because I needed it, just because I could. I made new friends. I traveled, just short trips, weekend getaways to Sedona or Santa Fe. But I picked the destinations. I chose the music. I never had to compromise on the radio station again. And every now and then someone says to me, "You're glowing." I used to laugh that off. Now I smile and say, I know, because I do. That glow, it's what freedom looks like after surviving a life you were never meant to stay in. And now, I live with both hands open, ready for what's next, but holding on to nothing that ever tried to break me. Life lesson from Claire's story. Sometimes, the deepest strength comes not from holding on, but from finally letting go. Claire's journey teaches us that sacrifice without respect becomes erosion, and silence in the face of neglect is not virtue. It's self-abandonment. For years, she gave endlessly, hoping love would be enough to earn appreciation. But real love doesn't demand martyrdom. It meets effort with effort, presence with presence. When Claire walked away, she wasn't being cold. She was reclaiming her right to peace. Her story is a reminder that it's never too late to begin again, to carve out a life that honors your worth. Whether you're 35 or 65, you deserve a life built on mutual care, not quiet survival. Boundaries are not barriers, they are bridges to a better version of ourselves. You don't need permission to prioritize joy, to chase peace, or to start fresh. Healing isn't always loud or dramatic. It's sometimes a small apartment, a quiet morning, a brushstroke on canvas, or a soft no spoken with conviction. You are not too old, too late, or too broken. You are allowed to change the story, even if it means writing the ending all by yourself.